Welcome to Promethea Astrology. My name is Alina, and in astrology, the Saturn return, literally astronomically, is when Saturn comes to the same point in the sky, roughly, that he was at when you were born. The symbolic meaning of this in astrology is basically a coming of age. So you have now, whenever someone reaches their Saturn return, experienced a full wheel turn of every single planet, traditional planet in your birth chart. So the cycle length of most planets through the zodiac is much shorter. A moon will go through the zodiac in 28 days. The sun will go through the zodiac in a year. It takes Jupiter about 12 years to get through every sign, but Saturn takes about between 28 to 31 years to make it through all 12 zodiac signs. So it's not until you get to be about age 30 that you've experienced a full cycle of every single traditional planet. And there are other planets that have longer cycles. The Uranus cycle is 84 years. Pluto is 250 years. But Saturn is the furthest planet that you can see with the naked eye. So it is a planet that astrologers have been aware of and thinking about and describing the nature of for thousands of years. And it's considered more personal for this reason, more integrated into your identity and who you are, whereas those outer planets are more considered like collective types of planetary energy, where the movement of Pluto through the signs will more relate to cultural shifts, big societal, humanitarian level shifts. And this can definitely be related to who you are personally, especially if you have one of these planets on your ascendant or something like that. But generally, the personal planets end with Saturn. So when we complete our first full Saturn cycle, this is your astrological coming of age. Okay, so what does it normally feel like and look like? The Saturn return is kind of like a dark night of the soul. It is a normally very challenging time. So we have to also understand the nature of Saturn to really get into this. Saturn is Lord of Time, first of all, which is significant for the Saturn return and everything I just told you, because he is the most furthest distant planet that you can see with the naked eye. So therefore, his cycles are just kind of the ends of time, the bounds of time for these traditional astrologers. Of course, now we have the outer planets, but I'm an ancient Hellenistic astrologer, so this is the way that I think about things. So Saturn is not only Lord of Time, but he also governs things like structure, boundaries, discipline, limitation, restraint, punishment, isolation, responsibility, lots of very challenging but important topics. I think of Saturn as the archetype of the stern, punishing father who wants what's best for you, but will demonstrate that in a way that feels very painful. So when we look at Saturn in your birth chart, the house placement that Saturn is found in normally indicates an area of core wounding, especially from your childhood. So for instance, if you had Saturn in the second house, this is the house that has to do with things like money and personal finances. So you may have experienced some serious scarcity in your childhood, or you may have dealt with hardships relating to money. If you have Saturn in the fourth house, then you might have experienced some serious core wounding with regards to the parents and potentially things like death or even the grandparents. So if you want a full breakdown of what all of the houses mean, I'll link a little free download that just goes through each houses and what the core significations are if you're not already familiar and want to look into what the house placement of your Saturn in particular means. So we look to Saturn to see what is the core wounding that you experienced probably as a child and then possibly throughout your life, especially if you were born at night. So during the Saturn return, a lot of times whatever that core wounding is will come online again in a serious and amplified way. when we look at the Saturn return as a transit, Saturn going over your natal Saturn, a transit is just looking at your birth chart and then layering on top of that the chart of the moment for right now, where all the planets are currently in the sky. And so the Saturn return is when Saturn is moving through the same sign that Saturn was at when you were born. And this serves to sort of amplify, magnify whatever that Saturn meeting is, and just brings all of this Saturnian energy of limitation, difficulty, restraint, hardship, all of that just becomes magnified. And like I said, though, Saturn does want the best for you, even though it doesn't feel the best. So normally by the time you make it through the end of the Saturn return, whatever that area of life has been generally gets completely restructured and normally will leave you probably in a better condition than you were at the beginning. For instance, with that example of Saturn in the second house, maybe if you were experiencing some limitations, constraint, difficulties, if your finances were messy, unorganized, not really thought out, not planned through for the future, by the time the end of the Saturn return hits, you normally have clarity and structure and systems in place for longevity to make that area of your life now function like an adult responsibly. That's sort of what Saturn does for you. And so this dark night of the soul is generally a return to that core wounding, a restructuring of this area of life for you, and also a coming into who you are. So now that you've experienced a full wheel turn of all of the planets, we have now really experienced kind of every archetypal configuration, every piece of yourself relating to every other piece of yourself through the astrological cycles. So now we have real clarity and more probably conviction around who you are. And generally the way the Saturn return works and how it does this for you is by tearing your life apart and then piecing you back together and forcing you to reflect on and decide, who am I really? What am I truly responsible for? What really matters for me? What do I need to let go of? What is not sustainable? And how do I build myself, who I am, in a way that will sustain me into the future? That's generally the way the Saturn return functions, to bring you into the fullness of who you are, unfortunately often through hardship and difficulties. What I really want to know, my questions for you to reflect on, especially with regards to this time frame, what are you responsible for over this time period? What did you discover that you are responsible for, and what you are not responsible for? Who did you become? And what version of you dissolved to become who you are now? I would just love to know how that went for you. So if you feel like sharing, please do in the comments. And if not, you might just reflect on these questions on your own. And if this is resonating and you want to talk more about it with me specifically to get some feedback and see how this relates to the rest of your birth chart, there is nothing that I would rather do than talk to you about your astrology. So you will find links to book a consultation with me below if that's something you're interested in. You could also subscribe to support my work here if you like, or share this video with someone else who you think might benefit from it. Thank you so much for being here. Be well.